Franks, welcome to the bright side.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, sir. You know, I posted something the other day on Facebook. I posted this quote from Gary Renard, who wrote the book Disappearance of the Universe. And he says, reality is invisible, and anything that can be perceived or observed in any way, even measured scientifically, is an illusion, just the opposite of what the world thinks. What do you say about that? Does that fall in line according to some of the things that you have found out in terms of your research and what you've written?
It's yes and no. My outlook on it is that there is no one reality. There's no question about that, and I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm speaking in terms of recent developments in quantum physics. What I would ask you to do is imagine an infinite number of universes, each of which differ from this one by only one quantum transition. What do I mean by that? One electron on one atom is in a different position. In all other respects, the universe is the same as this one. There are an infinite number of these universes, obviously. But in my thinking, these universes are static, not dynamic. Now, let me explain what I mean by that.
Yes.
Your typical parallel universe theory, and I'm quoting Paul Davies. If the many universes theory were correct, however, the seemingly conceived organization of the cosmos would be no mystery. We could safely assume that all possible arrangements of matter and energy are represented somewhere among the infinite ensemble of universes. Only in a minute proportion of the total would things be arranged so precisely that living organisms, hence observers, arise. And he goes on, basically, to say that in this, yes, every possible universe is true, but each of these universes is moving forward on its own. Events are happening in them, and therefore, these are dynamic multiple universes.
Right.
Okay, they're dynamic. Each one of them, things are happening in.
Right.
And apparently, every second in this theory, you're splitting into millions of copies of yourself, each of which is unaware of the other. I don't buy that. I don't buy that in the least bit.
Okay.
Okay. And they talk about the so-called Schrodinger's cat. Not an actual physical experiment with a cat, but it's a thought experiment in which a cat is put into a box, and you don't know whether a vial of poison has been released or not. And the quantum physics says that you get two states, one universe in which the cat lives, one universe in which he dies. And I don't buy that either. I buy an infinite number of universes, each of which is static, frozen, like a still frame in a motion picture. And it is your mind that moves through these universes.
Okay.
Okay, producing what you perceive. And the route you take through this infinite labyrinth of universes can be different from the route that somebody else takes. So what you perceive can be different from what they perceive.
So how does this whole concept of there being an infinite number of universes even come about? Most people see what they consider to be a reality with their eyes, and what they see, that's real, and that's there, and that's the universe. How do we get multiple universes from the one that we actually visualize?
From quantum physics, from the concept of quantum physics that requires the universes to be splitting at a fantastic rate into multiple copies of themselves. Of course, you can only, in that theory, you can only be in one universe, so you don't notice this happening. But quantum physics says it happens, and there is some experimental data to support that, as well as the fact that the computer industry is now even planning on having computers that dip briefly into an adjacent universe to speed up the computation process.
That sounds really far out, actually.
Yeah, I know, but I've read about that, and apparently it's happening. Assuming these parallel universes exist, I'm taking a static view, that they are static, frozen frames, and that perception of a universe consists of moving through billions of these universes every second. Not billions, trillions, quadrillions.
Yeah.
And just like a movie, when you move through the frames, you get a continuity of motion, and you perceive events as happening. But in reality, it's a bunch of still pictures on a movie. The difference between this and a movie is that on a movie, you've got one track down a piece of film. Here, these parallel universes, you can go through them in any different direction. You can arrange these static universes in a lattice where each universe is adjacent to another universe that differs only slightly from it. And you're moving through these universes. Now, we're talking in more than 3 dimensions, so that we'd have to say they seem superimposed upon one another. You don't have to travel far to get to a carbon copy of yourself a millionth of a second from now. But you're going through these static universes at a fantastic rate, and perceiving events is changing.
Okay, what is going through these universes? You say the mind is.
Your mind, my mind.
Is this the mind that exists outside of the body, or the mind that exists within the brain?
Well,
or as a result of the brain? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And Sharon of the University of Paris took the view that the brain is a tuning mechanism for the mind, like a radio is a tuning mechanism. You show a television set to some primitive person in a jungle, he's going to think there are little people in the TV set. But that's not the case at all. It's simply a tuning mechanism receiving the signals. And the brain should be distinguished from the mind. The brain, the spirit of a human being, the one thing that physics can't explain, has an independent existence. And if it's going through these frames, these universes at a fantastic rate, the perception is that things are happening. But the route you take can be different from the route the next person takes.
So you're saying then the physics actually cannot really, physics only, and even quantum physics itself only then can measure something that that has this a part of matter.
I think the fact that human beings have consciousness is a big embarrassment to most physicists because they can't explain it. They've tried, and the explanation, they've even come up with an explanation that people should have evolved to act like they have a brain. But I don't just act like I have a brain. I have one, and I'm aware of my own existence. And this mind appears to have independent existence. So it's capable of moving through these parallel universes, and that's what gives us the illusion of reality. But reality to you may be different than reality to me.
So these universes that exist then, because I know lots of times you watch science fiction and stuff like that, people slip into parallel universes or into other dimensions. So are you saying that there are no other dynamic dimensions or universes that exist just...
There is no dynamic universe that exists.
Uh-huh.
There is no dynamic universe that exists. We are moving through universes at a fantastic rate, which gives us the illusion of dynamicism. But we're moving through these universes, much like when you go to the movie, it's moving through a series of still photographs, and you get the illusion of motion up there. Of course, there you're talking about, 24 frames per second, and here we're talking about quintillion frames per second.
Okay. Okay, I follow that. I mean, that actually, I want to say makes sense. What it does do is it really points out, even from what you're saying right now, how important consciousness is to the whole thing. I mean, without consciousness, then nothing would be going on at all. You just have a bunch of static universes.
That's right. There's your answer to, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody is there to hear it, is there sound? And of course, you don't have a tree falling in the forest. You have universes adjacent to one another in which the tree is in different positions.
Oh.
And if somebody is going through those frames, they perceive a tree falling and sound being made.
Okay. So this is very close to the fact, and then if something is not observed, then it's not occurring.
Right.
All right.
It takes a mind to perceive events as occurring.
Now, when you started this book, what got you started on this path of thought? Because you're a lawyer, and law is your main thing. What was it that made you diverge off into this? Or maybe not, because you were involved in astronomy since you were young, but is this a similar interest, or you had an interest in it, or what sparked that?
Definitely an interest in cosmology dating back to high school, and wondering what the universe is all about, and trying to reconcile in my mind parallel universes. And one day it came to me: these are not dynamic, separate universes, each doing its own act. These are just still frames, and we're taking a route through them. You can arrange, if you assume that there are an infinite number of universes that differ from our own by only one quantum transition. One electron's in one different position on one atom somewhere in the universe. That's a different universe. And some of them differ greatly. Taylor has a wart on her nose.
Yeah, and this is my question. Who conjures up these images, these different universes? Who makes them happen? Where did they come from? That's my question.
Well, spontaneous reality, nature abhors a vacuum, so every possibility exists. And if every possibility exists, and you can make a trip from one to the other, and you are in fact involuntarily doing so right now as you listen to this, you perceive this as one reality, but it's your reality. Okay? It's your reality because somebody else's route through the universes may be slightly different or radically different. Now we get into questions as how miracles occur.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Well,
you just go through a route. If somebody is, and whenever a miracle occurs, there's always a physical explanation in hindsight. But what if somebody is able to manifest themselves? For example, let's take a dread disease like cancer.
Right.
They're able to imagine the tumor getting smaller and go through a series of progressive universes in which that tumor gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Mm-hmm. Of course, after the fact, the theory will be that the chemotherapy worked, but it may well be that their mind took them through the correct route to get out of the situation.
So then our listeners can really utilize their imagination, because imagination it sounds as if that's the key to being able to...
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And Christ himself said, if your faith was strong enough, you could move that mountain.
True.
And he proceeded to wither a fig tree right in front of the eyes of his apostles. Well, how did he do that? He took them, I guess, on a ride through adjacent universes in which the tree progressively got drier and drier.
Well, my question to that would be then, somebody else came along down the road and they saw a dried tree. Now, somehow their universe intersected with his as well then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there a main path through these universes from which we can only deviate slightly? Now, that I don't know. I don't claim to know that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, that's fair enough. I think that you've done a lot just in terms of being able to, to support the idea and the theories that you have put forth in the book, because it is obvious that throughout time miracles have occurred and people have experienced them, and people have experienced healing from cancer, and I think that if they were able to somehow access the universe in which they didn't have it, then that certainly sort of works. It works for me. It's the question as we continue to talk about this is just how it all gets put together. And I'm observing myself as I'm thinking now, because I'm thinking, okay, well, gee, I can go here, I can go here, I can go here, and I guess each of those would be somewhat of a different universe that I could enter into. Would that be correct? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit also about this experiment with the gravitational lens. Well, is that the one? There was the gravitational lens. Let's talk about that for a minute and explain what that experiment was.
All right. A gravitational lens is when you have a galaxy behind a very heavy object that can bend light rays as it passes near it. So light rays can go either to your eyes, either over it or under it or around it, and you're likely to see an image of the galaxy behind it as multiple images, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is all right, it's an extremely heavy object. Bends light coming from more distant sources behind it, and the objects appear in double or multiple images. And the question is light it behaves both as a wave and as a particle. Is a given wave of light coming both ways, or is it coming only one route? Mm-hmm. And you can freeze the light. You can determine it. I'd like to give you a little different scenario than that.
Okay.
Let us assume, and this is proven science, that a star, 1 million light years away, it takes light 1 million years to get here from that star.
Mm-hmm.
It emits a photon. An atom on that star emits 2 photons simultaneously, as tends to be the case, one going in one direction, one going in the other direction.
Okay.
That photon is polarized light, vertically polarized, horizontally polarized, polarized at an angle, but it's polarized light. When you can change the polarity of polarized light very easily by passing it through a series of polarizing filters till you get it from vertical to horizontal or vice versa. If you just put up one polarizing filter at right angles to the polarity of the light, it doesn't come through. But if you can turn that photon. Now, here's the catch. When that photon hits, and you turn that photon, the photon that went off in the other direction 1 million years ago simultaneously turns to match it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Reality can be changed, and that's faster than light, by the way. That's faster than the speed of light. That's an infinitely fast transition at a distance of, in this hypothetical, 2 million light years. That's a long way off. A light year is 5,880,000,000,000 miles.
So does this happen on the quantum level with everything? Do you understand my question? Where, say, because I'm not really good on this, but let's say an electron can simultaneously be affected by what another electron does.
Oh, sure, and these can happen over. And let me put this in a different perspective. A book was written by George Luis Borges. I believe he was an Argentinian many years ago, and his book was called I believe it was called The Forking Path. And I'd like to read to you a little bit from it.
Yeah, please.
Before I discovered, no, this is fiction. Before I discovered this letter, I kept asking myself how a book could be infinite. I could not imagine any other than a cyclic volume circular, a volume whose page would be the same as the first and so have the possibility of continuing indefinitely. And he goes on, he says, the phrase, okay, I understood the Garden of Forking Paths was the chaotic novel itself. The phrase, to various future times, but not to all, suggested the image of bifurcating in time, not in space. Rereading the whole work confirmed this theory. And he goes on to say that this is a garden he envisions, in which the visitor to the garden can walk through different paths to go from one entrance to another exit. And he says this web of time, the strands of which approach one another, bifurcate, intersect, or ignore each other through the centuries, embrace every possibility. We do not exist in most of them. In some you exist and not I, in others I do and not you, and so forth. Time is forever dividing itself toward innumerable futures, and in one of them I am your enemy. That's what Jean Louis Borges had to say. And considering that this was written nearly a century ago, it's fairly insightful. The movie Frequency.
Right. I saw that movie years ago. Yeah.
Oh, and I have the video that has a trailer on it on all the scientists that they consulted with. This is a science fiction movie that didn't come off the top of somebody's imagination. It came off parallel universes, and it's very accurate.
Well, that might be a movie for people, our listeners, people that are listening in, actually to think about and go and take that video, because I'm going to do that myself, actually, and take another look at it. I certainly enjoyed it when it came out, but it might be good to go back and, in light of your book and the discussion that we're having, take another good look at it and see what the possibilities are for us out there.
Oh,
now,
yeah. I think you have there not only parallel universes forking or splitting into the future, but also into the past, with different pasts being possible, different past histories.
So then the future can change the past, then?
And that's proven scientifically and experimentally with the aspect experiment in Paris, France, with light. Einstein came up with, and he wasn't comfortable with it, the causal order postulate that said for event A to cause event B, event A has to happen earlier in time than event B. And that has now been experimentally disproven at the quantum level.
Okay. So you're saying that event A doesn't have to happen earlier than event B,
To cause event B.
To cause event B.
Correct.
It could happen after event B? Or at the same time? Is it everything happening at the same time?
After.
After.
Now, if we're going to go to the Schrodinger cat model, you have to, the multiple states of the cat, living and dead, coexist until somebody takes the lid off the box. And then for that observer, it no longer exists. I don't think past events can be changed if you know the result in the past.
Okay.
Okay. But are we going to talk about the efficacy of prayer and manifesting? Suppose you have a friend who's taking an airplane flight to Los Angeles, and you hear on the news that a plane going to Los Angeles has crashed. Now, that person's some would say that person's either already dead or already alive. It doesn't do any good to pray about it or to do candle magic on it or so forth. But since you don't know the result, you can modify the past. If we're going to use a theological approach, you can say a prayer. God can listen to your prayer.
Okay.
And act on it because he's not bound up in time. But I think if we're going to use the concept of manifesting on a more, what should we say, pagan or Wiccan level, that you can do it yourself. You don't have to have anybody else do the miracle for you. The same principle would apply, that you can effect the past as long as you don't know what the past is.
As long as you don't know what it is.
Yes.
That's the key then, actually. Perhaps.
That's the key. Once it has frozen into your reality, you can't
Mm-hmm.
But until it's frozen into your reality, you can still modify it. As I say, we're going to take a Christian or religious view. You can pray to God, and God, knowing the future, can hear your prayer and answer it, because he knows you're going to say that prayer because he's not caught up in time.
Right.
If you use the Wiccan approach, you're still within good, solid quantum physics by saying that you can influence an event retroactively as long as you don't know the result.
Okay. Wow. All right. That actually, that makes some sense, too. To go a little bit off the beaten path, because I've been thinking about this a little bit, just a little bit off, not a lot. We are experiencing all over the world today people rising up in different countries. We have what we have in Egypt and Bahrain and Libya and Italy, and all these people taking to the streets. Now, my thought is, collectively, at a quantum level, are we not all either participating in that or being affected by that to a degree as to perhaps either motivate or even change, cause us to say do the same thing?
Yeah, you talk about morphogenetic fields, and this could well be the million monkeys or 1,000 monkeys effect. There was an experiment not an experiment. It was not intentional. It just happened. And I think it's called the 1,000 monkey effect or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that.
Right. And what happened was some researchers were on an island and observed monkeys getting seafood and having difficulty opening the shells of what they were harvesting. And one monkey discovered an answer, discovered how to use a rock to open the monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? At which time it spread not only on that island, but other islands in the area.
Like simultaneously almost.
Simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously. And there obviously is some kind of mind field there in which this happened. No question about it. And they were embarrassed about it, reporting it, because they're supposed to be good little atheists, of course. And,
so would it make sense then to say that we're sort of holographically connected then? So, if that, or connected at a quantum level, so that what does affect? I mean, it seems like if you get down to the basic quantum level, that somehow we are all connected. Would that not make some sort of a sense then that if something would, it's kind of like the one, the gravitational lens effect, I guess, where the one photon turned just because the other one did. So would that not sort of have some kind of effect upon us that way as well? So that maybe, for instance, if we get to a point where we become more conscious of ourselves, that sort of begins to just manifest individually as well all over the world.
Oh yeah, but I think the 1,000 monkey or million monkey effect happened without mass communication for the monkeys between these different islands.
Now there's a point.
Okay, and with mass communication, that only amplifies the thing. And you're having that also with the demonstrations in Wisconsin, which are multiplying into Ohio and other states. You're going to be getting them in many different states. And how much of that would happen even without mass communication is, of course, the question.
That is the question. Let me ask you to define some terms that you use in your book that I'm kind of interested in a little clearer explanation on. Contiguous and non-contiguous universes.
All right. I've postulated an infinite number of universes that are static. They're not moving. They differ from each other by only one quantum transition, one electron being in a different place. That makes it a different universe. And if you try to arrange all of these universes into an orderly arrangement, a contiguous universe is one touching the one you're in. It differs only very, very, very slightly. And a non-contiguous universe is much farther away through this lattice work, this labyrinth of universes.
Okay.
And has much greater differences. Elizabeth Taylor has a wart on her nose. That involves millions and millions and millions of molecules. And of course, if it's a universe in which John Fitzgerald Kennedy never got assassinated, well, my God, that's not millions and millions. That's quintillions of molecules,
Would that quite be a Googleplex of molecules?
Yes, I'm using Kasner and Newman's definition of a Googleplex and a Google.
Okay.
Not spelled like the website. It's spelled Googol, which they postulate as the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. That number alone is far greater than the number of all electrons in the universe. And a Googleplex is 1 followed by a Google of zeros. And again, it is just larger than anything that can be conceived of.
Yes, I know. I read it in your book, as a matter of fact. You said that if you were to start writing zeros after one, you'd be out in the stars somewhere. What wrote them continually after each other, one after another, just to define, the Googleplex. You'd be maybe out of the Milky Way.
1 followed by 89 zeros. 89 zeros will get all the electrons in the universe.
Wow, that's amazing. And those are finite numbers, interestingly enough.
They're finite numbers, absolutely.
Yeah, they're finite numbers. Now, this multidimensional lattice. So you're painting a picture that I'm beginning to see, and I don't know if the listeners are seeing it or not, but this multidimensional lattice. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that lattice consists of the contiguous and non-contiguous universes squeezed into what? Into what are they in?
Well, they're really superimposed.
Okay.
On one another. You squeezed into what space? I don't know what space this would occupy, but you go into an adjacent. We've been through trillions of them, quadrillions of them, just in the last couple of seconds of contiguous universes, and we perceive it like you perceive a motion picture. Because they're contiguous, and therefore everyone is next to every possibility, every possible variation of the one you're in.
Okay.
But you can go off in different directions and have different events that, depending on what series of frames you go through, that would be seemingly contradictory. In other words, in one of them, John Fitzgerald Kennedy lives, in one of them, he dies. That's Schrodinger's cat. That's Schrodinger's cat right there. Schrodinger was a quantum physicist. You put a cat, and nobody actually does this. It's an imaginary thing. You put a cat in a box, and there's a vial of poison that may or may not tip over and poison the cat. Quantum physics requires that the cat split into two copies of itself, one living and one dead. And your reality freezes when you open the box.
Right.
But in the other reality continues. And in a different universe, if you open that box, the cat would be alive.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to get that Schrodinger's cat thing. That's still a little bit hanging out there on the peripheries of my mind, because it's something that we're imagining to start with, which... Well,
yeah, it's not going to do you any good, and it would be animal cruelty to actually conduct the experiment.
This is true.
You aren't going to find anything else, because your reality would still freeze with an alive cat or a dead cat, and you're not in the other universe where the other possibility continues. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Now, in terms of how this becomes something that we can utilize in our lives in a practical way, this knowledge of the universal mother, what can we do? Do we sharpen our minds a little bit more so that we maybe use our imagination more, so we can move around and maybe draw on more possibilities?
The practicality of it is there's no limit to what you can do. Christ got it right when he said if you had enough faith, you could move that mountain. And Wicca's got it right on the same track, that you have unlimited potential with your mind. I haven't yet discovered how to move mountains, but certainly by imagining things vividly, we tend to cause them to come into being. And fear is imagining a bad outcome, and sure enough, you get the bad outcome. But as you imagine, things tend to go. That doesn't mean they will all the time, but there's certainly something to it. There's something to candle burning. Let me give you a couple of my websites here.
Yes, please.
Okay. Magical Miracles, that's one word, everything's lowercase. Everything's lowercase. magicalmiracles.com / and I'll give you some different words. They all end in .htm, but you can go candlemagic.htm. Mm-hmm. You can go wicca.htm. You can go prayer.htm. You can go miracles.htm. On magicalmiracles.com / miracles.htm or prayer.htm or wicca.htm or candlemagic.htm, lovespells.htm.
Okay.
Okay, now this is more oriented towards the paranormal. I also have a website, manyuniverses.com, which is more scientifically oriented.
Okay. All right. That's many.
But if you use Magical Miracles, you've got to do the / and .htm, or you're just going to be redirected to the Many Universes website.
Okay, and it's possible also to order your book through both of those websites.
It is possible through the website or through Amazon.com, but I have a link to Amazon.com, and I've got a sample chapter up there that you can look at.
Now let me ask you something. Okay, everybody, do you hear that? I think it's a good idea to take advantage of that. And which chapter, by the way, do you have up there?
On magicalmiracles.com, I believe I have chapter 1, and on Many Universes, I believe it's chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Now, let me ask you a question about that you mentioned in your book about androids versus sentient beings. What does that mean?
Well, I was commenting on the explanation of consciousness given by some people trying to explain consciousness, and basically there's a problem with their explanation, and it leads to the conclusion that an android or a computer has consciousness, and I don't believe it does. I believe it acts like it does. You can program it to act like it does, but it takes a living human being, in my opinion, to have consciousness. Very, very simply. And I talked about androids in that sense. Also, in a different sense, if your body exists in an infinite number of universes, but your mind is only active in one of them, and I encounter your body in another one, it's behaving like your mind is active in it. But you're not there. You're not there. You're not there.
That's the point I'm trying to get to. So now, okay. So then that universe would be dynamic, though, would it not? If a person is in it, even if my body is in it, say in android form, it's not sentient because I'm not in it, but they're encountering it there. Would that you see what I'm trying to say now? That's no longer.
I see what you're trying to say, but I don't think it makes it dynamic. I think I'm just going through a series of universes that have David Nathan's body in them, but David Nathan is nowhere to be found mentally. But it's behaving as if David Nathan, because each adjacent universe is a quantum transition from the one we're in, a very plausible next step.
So
there are many plausible next steps in many different directions, but each one is a plausible next step. So I perceive you picking up that cup of coffee and taking a sip, and I say, "Hi, David," and I perceive you as saying, "Hi." But you're nowhere to be found. You're in a different universe, at least at that moment.
Okay, see, now that's, I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. That would mean then that it's possible that we run into people all the time that aren't here. We're just interacting with their body, but...
Go down to the polling place. You'll meet a lot of them.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. You also said something in the book about say in terms of a mass tragedy where lots of people die, that the possibility of them shifting over into an alternative reality prior to, say, whatever the disaster is that struck?
Oh, it is absolutely possible that we perceive that an atrocity has occurred, but that some or all of those people, their consciousness went into a different universe where the tragedy did not occur. That's possible.
That is possible.
Sure.
Okay. Remember,
one conclusion of Schrodinger's cat is that your consciousness is immortal. That is a necessary conclusion of the Schrodinger's cat hypothesis, referring to Edwin Schrodinger, a Danish quantum physicist back in the 1930s. In other words, there must always be a copy of that box in which the cat goes on living.
Okay.
So it would appear that your consciousness will be somewhere at any point. A reasonable conclusion of Schrodinger's cat is that you're immortal.
Okay. Well, for you listeners out there, I think you should really get hold of the book and read the Schrodinger's cat. The story about that experiment. Read that experiment and get into it for yourself. It's still whizzing by me just a little bit. I mean, I kind of get it, and then when I think I got my mind wrapped around it, it sort of slips through again. But there might be some people out there that can really grasp it. And the book
is selling better. The book sells better every year.
That's amazing. I think people are ready for something that they can grasp in a scientific way that will open them up to understanding themselves better.
You have a physical explanation for miracles, manifesting, magic, the paranormal.
Okay, paranormal, a ghost. What's the story? How does a ghost fit into this?
A ghost fits into it in that it is an apparition that exists in the particular string of universes that you are going through. Whether that ghost is real and inhabited by a conscious mind or not is something you have no way of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But anything that you can perceive is real.
Okay.
And in a very real sense, it says that reality is created. This whole hypothesis says that reality is created by your mind, does it not?
Right. Well, that is what it's saying. It's saying that we go through this lattice work of connecting and interconnecting contiguous and non-contiguous universes in a jiffy, creating our own individual reality, and each person is creating their own reality.
Right, and a jiffy, of course, is a term for the smallest unit of time. There are more jiffies in 1 second than there have been seconds since the creation of the universe.
When I first read that term, I have to tell you, I had to laugh because, one of the things my mom used to always say is, I'll be there in a jiffy. This could happen in a jiffy. This happens in a jiffy. She used that term all the time. And I thought back to it and I was like, well, wow, she did she have any idea that a jiffy was that? Well,
probably back then she did. Probably back then science didn't, but they've used the term for the quantum unit of time, which is tremendously short. As I say, there are more seconds. There are more jiffies in a second than there have been seconds since the universe began some 15 billion years ago.
Wow. Well, people wrap their minds around that.
But let me read to you. James Jeans, the great British astronomer, wrote in 1932, today there is a wide measure of agreement which on the physical side of science approaches absolute unanimity, that the stream of knowledge is heading toward a non-mechanical reality the universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a great machine. Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought to rather hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. Not, of course, our individual minds, but the mind in which the atoms exist, of which our individual minds have grown as thoughts.
Wow, oh, I got that.
Now, that was 1932.
Wow. Okay.
And clearly, with all these possibilities out there, with all these universes, in other words, possible frames of matter, that arrangements of matter that you can perceive, it's really where your mind goes that creates reality.
Okay, another question. Okay, so people, is it possible for somebody to, well, okay, this would go back to maybe the event being frozen again. Somebody today to live in a world where Elvis isn't dead. I mean, some people do. I mean, they don't have to see him in order to not, in order for him to be, alive.
I don't know. I think if you or I encounter a person who says he saw Elvis in a concert yesterday and it wasn't an Elvis impersonator, it was the real thing, you wonder about his mental stability.
Right.
But is it possible? I suppose in this way of thinking, just about anything is possible.
That's what I'm saying. So maybe in this person's world, that's just what happened, which sounds really strange. However, it's also probably totally possible. So that's just a thought that occurred to me as we were talking about this.
I can't deny any possibility that's consistent with the laws of quantum physics.
Well,
and
there's something.
Just about any quantum transition from where you are now is a possibility.
Okay. I want our live listeners, you guys out there, pick up the phone and give a call in. We're approaching call-in time. I'd love to hear your questions, and it's a toll-free call, so don't be shy. Professor Franks, is the universe a hologram? Or it's not a universe. It's many universes then. I'm just getting to grasp.
I'm not taking...
There's no such thing as the universe.
Well, yeah, there is. I call it a super universe with all the possibilities. Quantum physics tends to call it a multiverse. I'm not using it in the sense that the word super universe is used in Urantia or the psychic quasi-religious sense, but just as an alternate term to distinguish it from multiverse, because I think the super universe is totally static, and the only thing that's moving is your mind and mine. And is there a generally heavily trodden path through it versus going off on sideways, on side roads? Probably. But I think there's no question that there's more than one path through it.
Well, it seems like to me that if there's a collective consciousness or a collective agreement, then maybe that collective agreement is the broader paths.
Sure.
Sort of what Jesus talks about, the straight and narrow and the path, the broad path. So maybe that's kind of, in a way, now that you just used that word path and that verse came to my mind, it almost makes sense, as if we can pick paths through this lattice work, and there are paths that maybe, collective consciousnesses agree on. For instance, we certainly are on a this revolution thing that's happening now is a path that seems to be being taken by many different people. So maybe, and certainly the way the world has been constructed in terms of the governments and the way people have thought, and a religious group or religious denomination is a path, a collective path, perhaps. So
Wheeler, a brilliant mind in quantum physics, says the universe does not exist out there independent of us. We are inescapably involved in bringing about that which appears to be happening. We are not only observers, we are participants. In some strange sense, this is a participatory universe.
That would be John Archibald Wheeler.
Yes, it would.
Yes. Yeah. The thing that, the discussion and what we're talking about is great. And one of the things that I would like for listeners to really get out of it is what is indeed what they can draw upon. I mean, let's take, for instance, somebody who is struggling for employment or struggling to make ends meet or struggling to find who they are in this world. Well, somewhere out there in the multiverse, there is a static universe, which hopefully is contiguous with theirs, where they are doing quite well, where they are taking care of themselves, or where they know what their purpose in life is, and they're going about it. And so, therefore, it's very possible for them to, through whether it's prayer or whether it's through some of the other rituals, make their connection with that. So
absolutely.
Okay.
By imagining it, that's probably the only thing I can suggest. Praying about it or imagining it. What you imagine tends to happen. So have beautiful imaginings.
And have and make co-creator choices. I'm assuming with your imaginings, the ones that take one into imagine your best world. You at your best in your best world, and it should be possible because that world, according to your book, actually does exist. It's just simply a matter of making contact with it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Well, that actually makes a lot of sense, and I'm hoping that people can really get something out of that. How has this affected your own life in terms of writing this, and how long did it take you to put this together and the research?
It took several years off and on, not that continuous a process, but off and on for several years. It dawned on me one day that this was a possible hypothesis for the nature of existence.
Did this come before What the Bleep Do We Know?
This came before What the Bleep Do We Know.
Okay. Right.
The original manuscript, of which this is a slight variation, but the original manuscript I copyrighted in, I'm trying to think, 1987.
Okay.
And that's before What's the Bleep. What's the Bleep is right on target, though. There's no question about it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I saw that movie, too. I thought it was really right there.
My favorite movie, however, is Frequency.
Well, are you going to make me go see that? Because now I'm just like, I saw it, and I remember watching it and going, wow, okay, there's something here. But the fact that you say that it is so totally possible, according to quantum physics, it really makes me want to take a second look at it. I know sometimes Hollywood has a tendency to just, throw stuff together and then you have to sort of suspend, belief in order to, or disbelief.
No, this is science fiction in which they consulted with leading scientific minds.
Yeah. That would be very interesting to go back and take a look at that again in light of this conversation and really see what it has to do to add to our understanding, certainly to mine, and possibly to what it is that we can do in our lives to move forward in terms of having the kind of life that we want. Okay, so postulate 7, the path one's consciousness takes through the lattice is determined by multiple factors. What would some of those multiple factors be?
I didn't enumerate them very well because I'm not totally convinced that I can define them. But going to the chapter, and this is getting in, we've now established at least the hypothesis of an infinite number of universes, some of which are contiguous and differ only slightly from the ones we're in, all of which are static and frozen. And the mind is making a trip through these. And yet, now I'm conscious, and I didn't choose to enter the super universe in any one position, or at least I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
Okay. Forces external to the mind seem to act upon the mind to push it along in a particular direction. And let's take the case of Christ withering the fig tree. He withered his own fig tree, but those who were with him saw the fig tree wither. Apparently, he was able to take them along with him on the path he chose through the universes. And you've got one clear force, the general entropic push from past to future. You might have a second external force, a God, directing the mind in a particular direction. But what about divine intervention? How many close calls have we had in our lives and missed death by a sliver on so many occasions, yet we're still here?
Right.
Okay. The individual mind itself has some control over its movement through the structure of the multiple universes. And certainly it's been a tenet of the occult that man is created in God's image, in the sense that every thought is an act of creation tending to manifest in the physical world what is first imagined. And the human mind tends to track in the general direction of the physical frame or energy state imagined first. When I say physical frame, I say energy state. I'm referring to a particular parallel universe that you'd like to get to, one in which you've got a nice standard of living, you're surrounded by people who love you, and you've got a measure of prosperity. And every thought is an act of some creation. You have some freedom of movement, but not total.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I'm the expert that can tell you exactly what steps you have to take to get more control over where your mind is going to go. I give the analogy in the book about a non-believer. And this is an alcoholic at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the clergyman running the meeting asks who in the audience doesn't believe in God. And some hands went up, and the preacher then asked if there are any, said, surely in time of deepest need, some of you had to believe in God. Is there anybody here who never has? And only one hand shot up. And the preacher said, surely there must have been a time in your life when you felt all hope was lost and you actually said a prayer. And the man admitted that once he had been on a hunting trip in the far north of Canada, and he strayed away from his colleagues and from the campsite and got lost. And darkness was falling and it was getting cold. And he had left his jacket and his rifle back at the camp. The sun was setting, temperature falling, and he tried calling, shouting, but nobody heard. And then it started snowing. He had not the foggiest notion which direction to go. And he said, yeah, I admit I did say a prayer. The preacher said, well, your prayer obviously worked. You're here to tell us about it. No, said the man, if an Indian on horseback hadn't ridden by at that very moment, I'd be dead now.
I know people that think like that. Think like that. Let's take this caller and see what we have here. Give us a second.
Okay.
Hello, is this Will?
Yes. Am I on?
Will, how are you? You're on the air with the Bright Side. You have a question for Professor Franks?
Yes, thank you. I listen to his show a lot. I have a question to ask him about parallel universes. In 1943, there was supposedly an experiment with the USS Eldridge. Which is known as the Philadelphia experiment.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Supposedly, they used Tesla technology with electromagnetism and trying to create a field for a camouflage of the ship, but supposedly the ship disappeared and went, what they thought at that time, to another dimension. Now, I'm just curious, is there a difference between if that ship went to another dimension or a parallel universe? Is a parallel universe also considered going to another dimension?
Sure,
or are they two different things?
Same thing. The USS Eldridge, apparently using Tesla's technology, went into another dimension, but apparently Tesla's technology had not been perfected, and of course we know that the thing went horribly awry.
Right.
That would have been a static universe. This is where I'm sorry, Will, I don't mean to cut into your question, but
that's okay.
That's okay. Is this a static? I'm back with that static dynamic thing again, according to you. Professor.
Well, everything looks dynamic. I'm saying it isn't, but it all looks dynamic. The USS Eldridge obviously disappeared from the field of view of those looking out over the ocean where it was, and those on it were transported to a different reality, a different place. Unfortunately, the thing went horribly awry, and people got stuck halfway, with their head through the deck and that kind of thing. And it was a tragic thing, and it's been obviously suppressed. But yes, obviously that's the method that's going to be used for space travel, however that was done. Apparently rotating electric and magnetic fields can alter reality. I don't know how to do it, but apparently rotating electric and magnetic fields, that's what was involved on the Philadelphia project. And you also have a comparable event that occurred at Montauk, Long Island, New York.
The Montauk project, right? Yeah.
Yeah, where some experiments were done in terms of time travel, and it's certainly possible. It's certainly, science is beginning to feel that time travel is possible.
Will, does that answer your question? Does that help you out there?
Could I ask one more quick question?
Yeah.
It may seem off. If say it were possible, and you went to a parallel Earth, parallel universe, and somehow you met up with your doppelganger, what would happen if it was mostly your consciousness is the one traveling, and you met your opposite, say on a certain parallel Earth, and you faced each other? What would happen?
No. They're static universes. I exist in static form in these universes, and if I go into that one, I'm in my body. I can't meet up with my double. I know. Okay, I can't. It's an impossibility in the theory that I'm expounding. I can go in there, but then I'm me.
I see.
Until I go in there, the me that's there is just a frozen frame in a piece of motion picture footage. Nothing in it. Okay. Now, time travel, of course, gives you that hypothesis. Can you go back in time and murder your grandfather in which case there's a contradiction in terms and all that.
Right.
But if you take this view of parallel universes, I don't think that's possible.
Okay.
Okay,
right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Okay.
Good night.
Good night. All right, Professor Franks, now that leads me to another question. I've seen on YouTube the video of some gentleman over in Europe that, now how does this go? He was repairing something under his sink, and a portal opened up, and he went through it and stepped into the future and met his self. And he took pictures of his older self. He and his, okay, maybe this is just cracky, but he took pictures of him with his older self. They had matching tattoos and everything. Is this possible, according to your theory?
I don't think it's possible to go into, no, not physically. No, I don't see how that's possible. I think you can go into the future, but then you're you as you would exist in that future. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I have trouble with his going into the future and meeting himself and shaking his own hand and so forth.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I have trouble with it. And I'd like to see the YouTube video, but my suspicion is one of what's called a hoax. I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical about opening up your kitchen sink and finding a portal and going through it and being in the future and meeting yourself. It just doesn't seem to me to be the way things happen.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, if we can get our offices to get a hold of that, we'll send you a copy of that so you can take a look at it. But let me ask you this about time then, because this is, time is what is time? It's obviously an illusion. Can it be measured? Does it turn around on itself? What are your thoughts on time?
Time, if all copies of the universe are static, not changing, not moving, time is the illusion of traveling through them, spending a jiffy, that's the smallest unit of time in each universe that differs from the previous one only in some very minute manner.
Okay.
And so you perceive motion, you perceive cause and effect, you perceive things as happening, but it's an illusion.
So, because this is something that I've certainly thought about, because it seems like there are different points of view out there. But if I were to go back I suppose it would be possible to go back in time as long as I'm not going back in time to meet myself, or if I'm going back in time to meet myself but I'm in a different body, that's possible according to your theory.
I would think so, and I would think that there is no way you can murder your grandfather.
You think there's no way you can murder your grandfather?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's not going to happen. I don't care how hard you try. The bomb's not going to go off. The gun's going to misfire.
That would
can't
make
happen.
Yeah.
You can't have the contradiction with the present.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in reincarnation?
I'm skeptical of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give a hard and fast statement of belief because I have a skeptical, open mind.
Okay. Because I've read, things where other people have claimed that they have made physical connection with themselves in another body from a future time period or from a past time period. And that's why I'm asking. because I also, I was trying to wrap my mind around that concept itself and the possibility of it.
About 35 years ago, I brought a friend to New Orleans who was quite psychic. And touring it, she kept directing me down streets. She had never been to New Orleans before. And she came to a house and got really scared, saying that in a previous life she had been a slave in that house. And I asked her what color the house was painted back then. It was white now. And she said pink. Mm. And I went back there the next day and took a paint scraping, and sure enough.
Okay.
She also knew where the statues were in a church she had never been into.
Okay.
So that was pretty much hair-raising, spine-chilling for me. But still, I don't know if her connection with the person who was in there is simply a close psychic bond, and it's a distinct, different person, or whether it was really her.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
See, I'm having trouble with that. I don't know, but I don't need it for this theory. The hypothesis is pretty good once it comes clear how the parallel universes are arranged. And those who basically deny the spirituality of man have real trouble with the idea that we split into millions of copies and each one is conscious and doesn't know what the other one is doing. No, there's only one me. There's only one me. And I'm aware of my existence. I don't act like I'm aware of my existence. I am actually aware of my own existence. And I don't just behave like I should have evolved to be aware of my own existence. I am aware, and that can't be explained. Julian James came up with a theory on that many years ago, and it totally tried to explain consciousness. And it's the one thing science can't explain, you see. But James, in 1976, talked about how the human mind evolved to have a bicameral mind and an executive part and a follower part, and consciousness evolved out of the breakdown of this bicameral mind. He did a fine job explaining his idea, but the fact that something has survival value doesn't explain how it came into being. Assume, for example, there'd be survival value in man's teeth being made of industrial strength diamonds. Well, that's great, except man's never going to evolve to have industrial strength diamond teeth because diamonds can only be synthesized in a high pressure blast furnace. The fact that something is useful to survival value doesn't prove how it came about. And that's the one thing that science admits it can't explain.
Okay. I'm happy to know that there are certain things that are certainly beyond science, because then that allows for an infinite. Obviously, if science can measure everything, then that seems to me to be to make things kind of finite, and then all of a sudden it takes makes life a little mundane. But to have something in terms of our consciousness that seems to be greater than everything and unmeasurable, that does allow for mystery, and that allows for life to be full of promise and full of potential. That and without that, I mean, it would really not. It'd be far more unpleasant than it sometimes seems to be right now.
Absolutely.
So I mean, that's a great thing that they can't do that. So we live in the world that we see with our eyes is, first of all, is not solid. even though we think it's solid. Even these physical bodies, I was looking at myself in the mirror a few minutes ago. That's not that physical body that I'm looking at is actually not solid. Is that?
Oh no, the space between protons and neutrons and electrons is astronomical, like the space between the planets. You perceive it as solid, but there's far more empty space in an atom than there is filled space.
That is an amazing thing. What does it make? What is it, according to you, that makes it possible for us to look out through our eyes and see these forms and every other form that we look on as a solid form?
Well, they're reflecting light, and the atoms are too small to see.
Okay. That seems very simple.
And you put your hand on the desk isn't going to let it pass through, even though there's a lot of empty space there.
Now, I assume somewhere in the multiverse there is a reality, though, where the mind is capable of recognizing that nothing is solid and is able to put its hand through the desk or through the wall.
The USS Eldridge. Yes. First of all, we're in the universe right now where we're capable of recognizing that solid matter isn't all that solid. But I haven't had much success putting my hand through desks. And I don't know, can it be done psychically? Can a poltergeist or a ghost go through something? I suspect so.
I mean, because if it's not solid, it's not solid. I mean, is it just a matter that we're just not trained to think that way? If we started off training children and from a very young age to start thinking about the universe as it is something that's not solid, that's
what I've heard about the Philadelphia Project is that people were able to walk through walls following that. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know.
Okay. All right.
I don't know. I suspect if we take the view that the mind can go into contiguous adjacent universes, you can imagine yourself on the other side of the wall with sufficiently strong faith and conviction that you're on the other side of the wall.
Well, I mean, Jesus did a few tricky things like that.
Sure he did. Sure he did.
Yeah.
Sure he did. And I'm sure he's not the only one who can do them. Marie Laveau in New Orleans worked considerable magic.
Who was she?
She was a voodoo queen in the 1800s. People would come to her, and her spells seemed to take effect.
Interesting. Well, I certainly don't. I'm not asking any of our listeners to try to walk through a wall, but I'll tell you though, I think that one of the things that I'm getting out of what this discussion that we're having, and I said this a little bit earlier, and I just want to repeat it again because I just feel like it's so important, is that we do have a subatomic connection with each other, and I think that connection is one that we can become aware of and utilize to maybe, start, if we're taking, even though we're taking individual paths across the lattice work, maybe we can we're becoming aware of that connection within ourselves and each other, we can start taking a path across the lattice work that creates a reality that's more amenable for everyone,
Oh, yes,
absolutely. That's fair for everyone,
Absolutely. It can get worse, too. It's getting quite frightening in the Middle East right now.
Yes, it can.
That might not bode well. I know we all hope they're going for democracy, but the way Iran went, 28, 30 years ago, however long ago, it started out as, in fact, the Russian Revolution started out with high hopes of democracy. So we hope this will end up with democracy. But
Well, I think that, again, I think on a subatomic level, I'm using that word, and I'm so unscientific, I'm sorry, but, maybe on that level, democracy is in big letters, and maybe it's something that this time around, it's going to succeed, because I think on that level of the human consciousness, there is a real yearning, this yen for true fairness for everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
I just think it's there.
Absolutely. And let us imagine that result is going to occur. That will help it to occur.
I totally agree with you there. Before we go off the air, though, I would love for you to just one more time, give your website.
Sure, I appreciate it. I have two websites. Scientifically oriented one is manyuniverses.com. More of a paranormal oriented one is magicalmiracles.com, but with that you're going to need a / and you can put / wicca.htm or / prayer.htm or / miracles.htm and use the /.htm on that, all in lowercase, or it's going to simply transfer you to manyuniverses.com.
And you can pick up a copy. You can find information how to get a copy of the book, The Universe in Multiple Reality, A Physical Explanation for Manifesting Magic and Miracles. Professor Frank, thank you so much for being a part of our show today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure talking.
States one universe in which the cat lives, one universe in which he dies. And I don't buy that either. I buy an infinite number of universes, each of which is static, frozen, like a still frame in a motion picture. And it is your mind that moves through these universes.
Okay,
producing what you perceive. And the route you take through this infinite labyrinth of universes can be different from the route that somebody else takes. So what you perceive can be different from what they perceive.
So how does this whole concept of there being an infinite number of universes even come about? Most people see what they consider to be a reality with their eyes, and what they see, that's real, and that's there, and that's the universe. How do we get multiple universes from the one that we actually visualize?
From quantum physics, from the concept of quantum physics that requires the universes to be splitting at a fantastic rate into multiple copies of themselves. Of course, in that theory, you can only be in one universe, so you don't notice this happening. But quantum physics says it happens, and there is some experimental data to support that, as well as the fact that the computer industry is now even planning on having computers that dip briefly into an adjacent universe to speed up the computation process.
That sounds really far out, actually.
Yes. Well,
or as a result of the brain. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And Sharon of the University of Paris took the view that the brain is a tuning mechanism for the mind, like a radio is a tuning mechanism. You show a television set to some primitive person in a jungle, he's going to think there are little people in the TV set. But that's not the case at all. It's simply a tuning mechanism receiving the signals. And the brain should be distinguished from the mind. The brain, the spirit of a human being, the one thing that physics can't explain, has an independent existence. And if it's going through these frames, these universes at a fantastic rate, the perception is that things are happening. But the route you take can be different from the route the next person takes.
So you're saying then the physics actually cannot really, physics only, and even quantum physics itself only then can measure something that that has this a part of matter. It
Yeah, I think the fact that human beings have consciousness is a big embarrassment to most physicists because they can't explain it. They've tried, and the explanation, they've even come up with an explanation that people should have evolved to act like they have a brain. But I don't just act like I have a brain. I have one, and I'm aware of my own existence. And this mind appears to have independent existence.
Thanks. Welcome to the bright side.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, sir. You know, I posted something the other day on Facebook. I posted this quote from Gary Renard, who wrote the book Disappearance of the Universe. And he says, reality is invisible, and anything that can be perceived or observed in any way, even measured scientifically, is an illusion, just the opposite of what the world thinks. What do you say about that? Does that fall in line according to some of the things that you have found out in terms of your research and what you've written?
It's yes and no. My outlook on it is that there is no one reality. There's no question about that, and I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm speaking in terms of recent developments in quantum physics. What I would ask you to do is imagine an infinite number of universes, each of which differ from this one by only one quantum transition. What do I mean by that? One electron on one atom is in a different position. In all other respects, the universe is the same as this one. There are an infinite number of these universes, obviously. But in my thinking, these universes are static, not dynamic. Now, let me explain what I mean by that.
Yes.
Your typical parallel universe theory, and I'm quoting Paul Davies. If the many universes theory were correct, however, the seemingly conceived organization of the cosmos would be no mystery. We could safely assume that all possible arrangements of matter and energy are represented somewhere among the infinite ensemble of universes. Only in a minute proportion of the total would things be arranged so precisely that living organisms, hence observers, arise. And he goes on, basically, to say that in this, yes, every possible universe is true, but each of these universes is moving forward on its own. Events are happening in them, and therefore, these are dynamic multiple universes.
Right.
Okay, they're dynamic. Each one of them, things are happening in.
Right.
And apparently, every second in this theory, you're splitting into millions of copies of yourself, each of which is unaware of the other. I don't buy that. I don't buy that in the least bit.
Okay.
Okay. And they talk about the so-called Schrodinger's cat. It's not an actual physical experiment with a cat, but it's a thought experiment in which a cat is put into a box, and you don't know whether a vial of poison has been released or not. And the quantum physics says that you get two. I know, but I've read about that, and apparently it's happening. Assuming these parallel universes exist, I'm taking a static view, that they are static, frozen frames, and that perception of a universe consists of moving through billions of these universes every second. Not billions, trillions, quadrillions.
Yeah.
And just like a movie, when you move through the frames, you get a continuity of motion, and you perceive events as happening. But in reality, it's a bunch of still pictures on a movie. The difference between this and a movie is that on a movie, you've got one track down a piece of film. Here, these parallel universes, you can go through them in any different direction. You can arrange these static universes in a lattice where each universe is adjacent to another universe that differs only slightly from it. And you're moving through these universes. Now, we're talking in more than 3 dimensions, so that we'd have to say they seem superimposed upon one another. You don't have to travel far to get to a carbon copy of yourself a millionth of a second from now. But you're going through these static universes at a fantastic rate, and perceiving events is changing.
Okay, what is going through these universes? You say the mind is.
Your mind, my mind.
Is this the mind that exists outside of the body, or the mind that exists within the brain?